You're listening to the Embrace Family Recovery Podcast, a place for real conversations with people who love someone with the disease of addiction. Now here is your host, Margaret Swift Thompson.
Welcome back. In today's episode, I continue my conversation with Karen Casey as she shares her remarkable journey from journaling to becoming a best-selling author of 30 books, and what it means to fully embrace the true meaning of detachment. Trigger warning, there is discussion of suicide.
The Embrace Family Recovery Podcast.
Your first book that you did choose to write has been sold over 4 million times and is still to this day utilized and prevalent and very much speaks to people.
Yeah.
It's amazing, Karen. What a legacy you've left and what a gift you've given so many. And that's just one title, one book. Why was that your first? Do you remember when you sat down?
Yes, except that I wasn't sitting down to write a book, Margaret.
That was your journaling.
I was just journaling because I was so desperate to feel some kind of a connection to my higher power. After I was sober about 18 months, I was on the trajectory to take my life. I was in graduate school. I was consistent at AA. The thought of taking another drink had certainly not crossed my mind, but I felt so alone and distant. I would go to an AA meeting and feel so good and so connected through my friends and through what happened at the meeting. But then I would go home and feel such emptiness.
Yeah.
And finally, after about 18 months, I don't remember how the idea came. Enough is enough. But I ended up at that place of just feeling. As a little kid, I had thought at times about what would it be like not to be here just because of the pain and tension in the family. And so it wasn't an idea that scared me at all. It felt like an easy thing to do, to just end the whole thing. So I rolled up all the towels to tuck in around all the windows in my one-bedroom, $100 a month apartment. And I was going to turn on the gas. It was one of those one-bedroom apartment gas stoves. And so I wasn't really even thinking about anything or contemplating anything. It was like, oh, it's so hard to kind of even say that you're about to take your life and it didn't matter. But that's exactly how it felt. And then there was a knock at the door, a very persistent, loud knock. And I finally went to the door because I was codependently worried about this little woman that lived next door to me. I lived in an apartment on Hennepin Avenue, right across from Loring Park. And this little woman that lived in the apartment next to me, I was worried about her being concerned about the persistent knocking. So I went to the door and I didn't open it. I just said, "Who's there?" And she said, "Pat, and we have an appointment." I was like, "What?" And she said, "Yes, I'm a financial planner and we have an appointment to talk about your finances." Now, remember, I lived in a $100 a month apartment. I was teaching at the university. I earned a salary just enough to get by. So none of that made sense, but I opened the door. And she had out her daily planner, which everybody used way back then.
Sure.
Sure enough, there was my name. And it was like, holy crap. And she just kind of a little bit forcefully nudged her way into my apartment. And she was lovely. She was tall. She had red hair and it was back in a bun. I can still see her as well today as the day she walked in. And she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No, I'm very depressed." And she went in and sat down at my kitchen table. And she said, "Well, I understand depression a little bit. I've been depressed." And she said, "And my husband is a recovering alcoholic, and he struggles with depression." And she said, "You know what I've come to believe is that we're depressed. Our depression is because we're on the precipice of a new spiritual understanding. And God is really waiting for us to become aware of his presence. And the depression that we feel is because we're resisting that awareness of God's presence." And I'm just sitting there thinking, holy crap, where did all this come from? And she said, "You know what you need to do? This abyss you feel in front of you." And I realized, in fact, that was exactly what was in front of me, what I was about to jump into by turning on the gas. She said, "Reach across, because God is on the other side, waiting to help you." And she said, "There's a name for all of this if you want to look it up. It's called chemicalization. But it's when you're about to move into a new spiritual understanding." And with that, I right away just knew that what she told me was the truth. And she stood up. Notice she didn't say one word about finances. She walked to the door. She turned around and reached for me and put her arms around me. And she said, "You know, Karen, you're going to be just fine." And she walked out.
Wow.
And of course, I had never seen her before. I never saw her again. But I really believe that the God of my understanding has assignments for people. And her assignment was to show up at my door. And that was a huge turning point.
I'm sure.
And I knew what she said was true. And this is a long way to get to the writing of my first book. I knew what she said was true. But as a matter of fact, it didn't quiet all of that anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back to doing all the things I needed to do. I went to meetings, I went back to teaching, but I still felt that distance. And I sat down and just simply started to journal. I didn't have any idea what the journaling was going to be about, but it brought me solace. I would come home from work and I would sit in my chair in my big old brown recliner and just write. And this was after I had finished my dissertation, of course. And in fact, it was while I was working at Hazelden. And Harry Swift, the president of Hazelden, had taken an interest in my own recovery journey. And he asked me one day how I was. "How are you doing?" And I told him, I don't know why I felt even moved to tell him. Why do we feel moved to do anything that we do or say, except that it's intentional? Mm-hmm. And so I told him that I was really struggling to feel the presence. And so I was journaling about it. And so he said, "Why don't you bring in to me sometime, if you don't mind, what it is you're journaling about? I'd be just curious." And I did. Eventually I did. And he said to me, he called me up and he said, "Karen, I think there's a book here, a book that needs to be written for other women." And it was like, really? And that's how Each Day a New Beginning became a book. And that's how, when I sit here today and I look at Let Go Now, Embracing Detachment, I look at A Life of My Own, a meditation for codependency. I look at my most recent book, which was Each Day a Renewed Beginning, Meditations for a Peaceful Journey. None of it did I ever say, now this is what I really need to do.
All been journaling.
It all has resulted from my sitting down and just beginning to write about something. And then it becomes what it needs to become.
That's amazing.
I go to 4 AA meetings a week and 2 Al-Anon meetings every week. I mean, I'm still consistently committed to both programs. But, I think that when it comes to family issues, and I know that that's a crux of what you do with your life is help families. Probably the most important thing I ever learned in my life, and it was through Al-Anon, was about detachment. I had never heard that word before. And when I first heard detachment, I just thought it meant shun. We just kind of detach and push people aside. It never dawned on me that what it meant was allowing others to have their own life.
It's a gift.
A gift. I mean, it's a gift. It's a wonderful gift.
This podcast is made possible by listeners like you.
Wondering if you've heard about my new venture, the Embrace Family Recovery YouTube channel. Don't worry, podcasts come out every Sunday in the same way you've always heard them. However, if you would like to go to YouTube, you can see the episodes there, and some will be video versus audio. And also there are solos and moments with Margaret where I share reflections on questions I'm asked by clients who seek me for coaching around their family disease. If you want to find the YouTube channel, please go to @Embrace Family Recovery and push the subscribe button so that you'll get notified when new content is added. We're constantly adding new content and reposting old content. Thank you for your support, and any of you who wish to write a review on my podcast or on the YouTube channel, it would be much appreciated.
You're listening to the Embrace Family Recovery Podcast. Can you relate to what you're hearing? Never miss a show by hitting the subscribe button. Now back to the show.
A lot of families struggle with detachment and detaching with love. So is there a passage or something you want to read from that book that you think would be helpful for our listeners?
Sure.
And again, the title of the book you're reading from is?
Let Go Now, Embrace Detachment as a Path to Freedom.
Perfect.
What this book consists of is 200 little kind of page-long essays, page-long journaling essays about detaching. And all 200 are related in one way or another to the whole concept of detachment. But the quote at the top is, detaching from our companions does not mean discounting them, dismissing them, or rejecting them. And that's actually essay number 131 on page 154. Keeping our focus on our own lives in no way means we don't care about other people. Letting others be free of our focus is actually a gift to them. As a youngster, I seldom averted my eyes from others' activities. I was obsessed with wondering what they were thinking about and if it related to me. Was I okay? Were they mad at me? Were they going to reprimand me or reject me? This obsession didn't leave me until a few years after finding Al-Anon. The miracle is that it did leave. I know that what happened for me can happen for anyone. And then the message goes on. I mean, the beauty is that we can finally learn how to let go of what others are thinking about us. I mean, the real gift is that we don't get to live our own lives if our focus is always on somebody else.
Right.
And when our focus is there, we're not giving them the respect, the freedom to live the journey that they were born to live.
And my language is that I'm chasing a moving target, much as an alcoholic is chasing it through alcohol.
Right.
There's never enough to sustain, fill me, make me feel good enough. None of that outside stuff is going to help me find peace.
Right.
And we're chasing it just like somebody who's an alcoholic chases the right amount of booze.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think that Another line that I just picked out a couple. Detachment is understanding that we are never the cause of someone else's actions. I think that as a kid and growing up in a family like I did, and I'm sure like a lot of our listeners grew up in, I somehow always felt like everything was my fault. That when my mother was upset, it didn't occur to me it was because my dad was treating her poorly. I must have done something. I think that codependency is so caught up in thinking we are the cause of what somebody else is feeling, as well as we are responsible for changing that person's feeling. We're the cause and responsible for changing their feeling.
Well, and it goes to speak to Karen. If we think we're the cause of the problem and the pain, then by God, we're going to have to figure out a way to fix it no matter what.
Yeah.
And it is probably the most common, as you know, thought of children in any situation because of the egocentric and the necessity to survive. And when families don't talk openly about this with their children, assuming they don't know, don't feel, don't see, we're doing such a disservice because then they're making it make sense in their own mind. And the number one thought is, what did I do wrong? Or what is wrong with me? Or why is this happening?
Exactly. Obviously that's how we all grew up in my family. But back then, I told you about the interview with my mother.
Yeah.
And when I interviewed my dad, and he said I'd been afraid every day of my life. He had become a very successful man in Lafayette, Indiana, and was a banker that everybody looked up to. And he went to work, he told me, every day afraid that he would, in fact, approve a loan or something that a person would default on. And I said, well, that wouldn't have been your fault.
Right.
He said, yes. He pounded the picnic table. Yes, by God, it would have been. And,
wow,
to have lived, and at that period of time, I know I was 37 or 8 when I came home to talk to them because I had been sober just a couple years. And so I know that made my mother, who was 30 years older than me, 68, and my dad was 5 years older than her. So he would have been 72. So from the time he was 6 years old to 72, he had been afraid. Afraid. And the fact that families then and still don't really tell each other how they're feeling creates not only a distance between them, but no way for them to kind of walk through anything together.
Keeps that distance.
Yeah, and it makes what you're doing with families so crucial.
Thank you. I love what I get to do with families.
Yeah, families just have to be brought together, but they don't know how to come together by themselves.
Come back next week as we will close our conversation out with Karen Casey. In our final episode, Karen will discuss family dynamics and why it is so vital to continue actively participating in your own recovery work. I want to thank my guest for their courage and vulnerability in sharing parts of their story. Please find resources on my website, embracefamilyrecovery.com. This is Margaret Swift Thompson. Until next time, please take care of you